They use 40% of the world's energy, emit 50% of its greenhouse gases. They are not the cars we drive. They are the buildings where we work, live, and grow. Buildings designed with an unconscious disregard for nature. Adopting sustainable alternatives is not only a matter of progress, it's a matter of survival. Design E squared, the economies of being environmentally conscious. There. What do you see? A failed experiment in overcrowding? Massive pollution? All that represents an ecological disaster? In reality, could you be looking at one of the most efficient ecosystems in the world? Could the grayest city in America actually be one of the greenest? Could reality, in fact, be a matter of perception?
When people look at Manhattan, even when New Yorkers look at Manhattan, they see an environmental nightmare. They see concrete and big buildings and loud noises and diesel fumes and garbage. If you measure New York City by the square foot, no place in America spews out more greenhouse gases or more automobile exhaust or more trash. But that's the wrong way to look at it. If you look at this city per capita or by residents, New Yorkers pollute far less than anybody else. They use far less energy.
New York, if it were the 51st state, would be the most energy efficient state, but it'd be the 12th most populous state. The community of crowding provides a kind of separation from the individualization of consumption that you find in the rest of the United States. Manhattan, especially with its great density of population, both of live and work, where people can walk to work, they can bicycle to work as I do, or more importantly, for the great mass of people, they take public transportation.
One of the first things that happened to my wife and me when we moved to the country from the city was we both gained weight. The reason was that in the city we walk all the time. In New York City, walking is a major form of transportation. It's maybe the most important form of transportation. Once you get outside the city, you really can't walk anymore, even if you wanted to. I can walk to the post office about a half mile up the road, and I can walk to the library. But the reality is that to live in an environment like this, you pretty much have to live in your car.
The city is in many ways the greatest energy-saving device man's ever created. There's no better model for energy conservation than putting people close together.
It's a thriving community of communities. People are out walking around, bumping into people, talking. They're not sealed up in their car.
Los Angeles, Atlanta, Houston, those are just places in which people drive to skyscrapers instead of driving to suburban office parks, and then park their cars in garages, and then drive home again. So there's not that much difference in energy consumption in places like that. So it's not just the city that's the good model for energy conservation, it's the older, denser city, the city that was created before the 20th century. Once a city was made to accommodate to the automobile, it loses its advantage from the standpoint of energy conservation.
The average American spends almost 2 hours a day in a car. A waste of energy, right? But what about the buildings that we spend the rest of our time in?
Building and operating buildings in the United States, for example, is responsible for 40% or more of all energy consumption.
As a total of all the buildings we have in this country, they use more energy than cars. It is not as obvious, but if you think about the cost of heating and cooling buildings and how many of them we have, and then also think of the cost of manufacturing buildings and all the materials that go into them, it's enormous.
This house back here is heated by an oil furnace. It's a 200-year-old house. It's a recycled house, or it's a house that has been carefully reused for more than 2 centuries. But because it is, it's not very efficient. The biggest problem that we face is that every day we Americans consume more than 800 million gallons of oil one way or another.
everything in the building industry depends on the larger economy. Our present-day larger economy depends very much on energy resources. And I think that we're at a point now where the cost of energy is a real consideration that keeps green principles foremost in everyone's mind.
Okay, so we have an energy problem. That we know. And yet we still need more energy for new buildings, new offices, new homes. So where are the new ideas?
I think 4 Times Square represents a really important breakthrough. It was the first building that really said that they are going to make an attempt at bringing in green technologies into a skyscraper form.
Well, we certainly were not intending to lose money on the building at 4 Times Square. We were motivated by our interest in demonstrating that there was a better way to build buildings.
4 Times Square was an important beginning. It doesn't get all the way by any means, but it did a few things that buildings before it had not done. It took advantage of the latest materials, the latest technologies. It has a number of internal features such as, recycling waste, air, and allowing energy to be sort of pumped back through the building in an efficient way. It was built by a major developer, Douglas Durst. He drives a Toyota Prius. He really does care about this stuff. And I think the mere fact of a major New York real estate developer signing on to the Green Initiative, so to speak, saying, okay, I'm not going to dismiss this as just a bunch of nonsense thrown at us by tree huggers that businessmen have a responsibility to reject. Instead, he says, you know what? I think they're right, and let me see how far we can take a skyscraper.
In building 4 Times Square, we realized that this was not just an environmental approach, but it was an intelligent approach and a much better way to build buildings. And that's why everything we've done since then has been, we don't really call it environmental anymore, we call it a smarter, more intelligent way to build.
Whether you call it environmental or smarter, it's contagious. From 4 Times Square to the new Bank of America building at 1 Bryant Park.
When the Durst started talking to the Bank of America to put their New York headquarters on the adjacent site, they said, our starting point is 4 Times Square. We're going to take all of the knowledge of 4 Times Square and make it better.
We're on the corner of 6th Avenue and 43rd Street and 42nd Street on the site of the Bank of America Tower at 1 Bryant Park. The site behind me is just over 2 acres in size, the largest construction site in Midtown Manhattan. And we're looking at this enormous excavation site and foundation that will be the site of what we hope to be the greenest skyscraper in America.
Looking among the neighboring buildings, we have indeed created a much taller building that will have terrific views of both the East River and the Hudson River, Central Park, and in fact it will have a pretty good view of the Atlantic Ocean. 4 Times Square is very prominent in the foreground at this point. You can now see this very glassy crystalline form standing by itself. Between the 2 buildings is about 200 feet. And the area in between is going to be planted as a green roof so that people in both buildings will be able to look out and see this beautiful planted area.
It wasn't that long ago that glass was an energy inefficient building material. And people said, oh, these modern glass skyscrapers, they just are terrible. They're the worst things you can do. We can't have so much glass. Well, the technology of glass has continued to improve and improve and improve to the point where now glass is not significantly different from masonry.
We actually have the ability to silk screen on glass tiny ceramic dots called frit, which allow us to almost create a pigment on the glass that allow us to see out and the sun to be reflected back out, dramatically increasing the solar heat gain coefficient, while at the same time allowing the clearest view out to the outdoor environment.
The secret is right now the technology and how that's helping to soup up those old solutions and really create the new poetry of building.
What would Walt Whitman write? Would he say, perhaps, that a new poetry of buildings is born of a deeper beauty, not merely of sleek design, but rather part of its DNA, ingrained in the materials, its source, its inner workings, possessing an unseen soul? Would the poet in him suggest that a building can do more than stand, that in its own way it can live and contribute?
Some of the things that are really exciting right now are ideas that seemed a little bit crazy at the time that people had proposed. One of these is blast furnace slag in the concrete. For every 1 ton of cement that we use in concrete, 1 ton of CO2 is produced out in the atmosphere. All of these concrete walls and all of the concrete in this entire building will be made with 45% blast furnace slag. It means that we're substituting 45% of the cement with blast furnace slag, producing no CO2. On a project of this scale, it means that we will reduce the CO2 production into the atmosphere by the making of this building by 56,250 tons of CO2 production.
We decided on this project that we would capture all of the stormwater that is going to hit this site. We also, in the design phase of the foundation of the building, asked our geotechnical engineer, what are we going to do about groundwater, water that's found in the rock fissures? And his answer was that we would need 3 sump pumps working pretty much around the clock, and they would be pumping hundreds of gallons of water per minute out of the building, and in his words, into the storm system. We said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to take the water and we're going to pump it into our storage system, and we're going to use it. We're going to add to that water from the steam condensate and water from the air conditioning system, and we're going to treat it slightly, and we're going to use it to flush toilets and for our cooling tower makeup. This is resulting in approximately a 50% decrease in the amount of potable water that this building will use, and